Hey everyone, before we get started, we just wanted to mention that we were invited to be part of a really cool video interview with Ken over at Sledgehammer Horror for his My First Horror Movie series. And if you are interested in learning more about the first experiences Joseph and I both had as children with horror films, please check it out. The link is posted below. Thanks.
That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about The Devil All the Time, the fourth film directed by Antonio Campos, which opened in select theaters September 11, 2020, and will be available to stream on Netflix as of September 16th, 2020.
I didn't realize it was on Netflix, but we did watch it on Netflix.
That's the screener.
Yes. This is a meaty story.
It's a meaty tuck. It's based on the 2011 debut novel by Donald Ray Pollock, who also served as the omniscient narrator. Antonio Campos and Paulo Campos were the ones that adapted the screenplay.
There's a lot going on.
There is.
But I'm going to try to tell the story. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so the story revolves around Arvin Russell.
Mm-hmm.
We first meet him in 1957 and then again in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an 8-year gap. When we meet little Arvin, he's like 8 or 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we are reintroduced to him, he is like 17.
Because the time period is 1957 through 1965.
That's what I said.
Oh, you said, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, and the location you didn't say.
West Virginia and Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we first meet Arvin as a little boy.
Mm-hmm.
His dad, who's played by Pennywise.
Bill Skarsgård, otherwise known
Pennywise is a veteran who's come back from war,
mm-hmm.
and he has some like post-traumatic stress from that, involving like a mercy killing he was involved in conjunction with his wife, Arvin's mom, dying of cancer.
Mm-hmm. Haley Bennett.
So there's that stress. But before we get to that, we have to talk about how Pennywise met his wife.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a scene at a restaurant.
Diner.
There are 2 servers and another lady.
Mm-hmm.
And these 3 ladies are important. So
yes.
One of the servers, Pennywise meets, and that ends up being his wife.
Mm-hmm.
There's another lady named Sandy, who's played by
Riley Keough.
She is the sister of the local sheriff, who's played by Sebastian Stan.
Mm-hmm.
There is a man in the diner named Carl, who's played by
Jason Clarke.
She sort of has a connection with Carl, which is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a third woman named Helen.
Mm-hmm.
Helen links up with the Harry Potter man.
Helen's played by Wasikowska.
Okay.
And the Harry...
Is that the Matrix? Is she related to the Matrix people?
The Wachowskis?
Oh, never mind.
No.
Okay.
Harry Melling plays this revivalist preacher that Helen, who's presented as this orphan without anyone to care for, she marries him. And it also is probably notable that Willard, that's Bill Skarsgård's character's mother, is trying to hook him up with Helen.
Okay. So, what's Pennywise's wife's name?
Haley Bennett's name.
Who knows? The one dying,
Charlotte.
The one dying of cancer, Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
So Pennywise and Charlotte, Carl and Sandy, and then Helen and Harry Potter man. Harry Potter man, we find him, he's like you said, a revivalist. So
yeah.
Those like Christian people who play with snakes and shit. So he ends up dumping like poisonous spiders on himself to test his faith. Mm-hmm. And one of these spiders bites his ass. So he ends up with like a swollen head, and he locks himself in a closet for weeks. Mm-hmm. And he has a vision while he's in the closet that he can provide a sacrifice, which is his wife. So basically sacrifice his wife, and then she will like rise from the dead. So he kills his wife, but she does not rise from the dead. Okay. Pennywise, the wife dies. He sort of like goes into a spiral because he had been taking poor little Arvin to some like prayer log, getting him to pray kind of in an abusive way.
In the woods, like a makeshift cross that he's made out of boards. It's also important to note that he wasn't a religious man until he'd married his wife and therefore had something to lose. and it is his fear that God's going to punish him for the mercy killing he did by taking away his family.
So, the trauma of losing his wife causes Pennywise to kill himself. Okay, so now Arvin's parents are dead. Harry Potter man, after he kills Helen...
His character name is Roy Laferty.
Roy?
Yeah.
When Roy, after Roy kills his wife, because he's with a friend, like the friend witnesses him do this, so the friend's like, we need to escape.
It's also notable that the friend is crippled because he'd also done a test of faith with arsenic and...
Okay. So, Roy is on the lam and gets picked up by Carl and Sandy. So we find out Carl and Sandy's thing is they like to pick up young men. Sandy will have sex with them, and then Carl will like torture them, mutilate them, and kill them, and then take pictures of it. But the first time we see it is with Roy. So he's like, Roy, you're gonna have sex with this beautiful girl. I'm just gonna take a few pictures, and he's like, no, he's not. He's very serious about his religion. He's like, I'm not doing this. You have to kill me. So Carl kills Roy. So now Lenora, their daughter, is without parents. So Lenora goes to live with Arvin's grandmother.
That's who she was left with.
That's who she was left with. And then Arvin goes to live with her. So then we go to 1965, and now Lenora and Arvin are like older teenagers. So Lenora is very religious. She said, the boys say she's not cute. So
Now played by Eliza Scanlen.
So she gets picked on because she's not cute and she's very religious. Arvin is not religious.
Correct.
And he has a desire to protect her. So we see him protecting her, like fighting these boys who pick on her.
And now it's played by Tom Holland.
And now Arvin is played by Tom Holland. A preacher comes into town who's played by Robert Pattinson.
Reverend Preston Tiergarten.
He's shifty, but no more shifty than probably any preacher man. He ends up seducing Lenora and getting her pregnant. But then he tells her, like, that's your dirty lust, and I'm not going to be responsible. You need to get rid of it, figure it out, but don't involve me. So her answer to the problem is to commit suicide. But right before she's about to hang herself, the narrator says, like, she decided that, no, I'm going to have this baby, I'll be a great mother. But she accidentally slips and hangs herself. Arvin finds her, obviously very upset. Then a few days later, one of the local cops comes and tells Arvin, did you know your sister was pregnant? So he puts two and two together and realizes it's the preacher man. So he goes to confront the preacher man and kills him. So now Arvin's on the run and he gets picked up by Carl and Sandy. He realizes there's something weird about what's going on and he sees that Carl has a gun. But Arvin also has the gun he killed the preacher man with. So he kills he kills Carl and Sandy. While Sebastian Stan, the sheriff, shows up and sees his sister dead, so obviously he's very upset. But prior to that, he had gone to visit Sandy and found in her apartment a picture of her being sexual with some man, and he knew that something was not right about what she was doing. So after she dies, he runs to her place to try to find any evidence, and he finds a box worth of photos. And that's where in a really cool montage, we see sort of all the gruesome crimes, all the mutilation and all the murders. So these two fools were out here as serial killers for years. He gets a call from someone saying the preacher man was killed and we think it was that Arvin boy. And they tell him it was this kind of gun. Wow.
A Luger,
like a 9mm, I don't know these terms. He puts two and two together and realizes that's the same gun that killed his sister, so he thinks it's Arvin. And they say, oh, he probably went back to his hometown. So the sheriff goes back to Arvin's hometown and he finds him. He threatens to kill him because he's shooting at him, but Arvin kills the sheriff. And the final scene is Arvin hitchhiking, gets into a car and rolls on down the road.
Yep.
The end. All
He's
right.
on down the road.
So please enlighten us with your brilliant words.
Well, yeah, there is certainly a lot going on in what I would call a Southern Gothic saga. This plays to me, I haven't read the novel and I wish I had made time to read it.
I actually, if you buy the, well, no, because you'll probably buy the book, and now we have another book in this house. But I would read the book too. You can get it from the library. Go ahead.
But as presented in this adaptation, felt a lot like William Faulkner crossed with Bret Easton Ellis.
I can't confirm
the
those
violence.
references.
Oh, okay. Well, you have seen the Faulkner adaptation of his novel Sanctuary, because we watched the story of Temple Drake, where Miriam Hopkins is raped with the corn cob.
Yes.
It's very much of that kind of theater of grotesque.
Okay, I'll confirm that.
The casting is it's a phenomenal cast. And almost all of them are British or Australian.
Yeah, there are very few Americans playing these Midwestern. My first note is I didn't know Ohio was next to West Virginia.
Yeah.
So it's Midwest, not Southern.
I think the distinction lies in however you want to place accents. But, being from Minnesota, I was always surprised that was called the Midwest, because that's technically north, but whatever. But the cast is interesting, and I think Campos does a really fine job of, because the movie's nearly 2.5 hours, of being able to parse through all of this and all these characters and make it also cohesive. That said, there might be a little, I could have gone for it to be a little bit more lurid, a little bit more tawdry. It is violent, and there are some garish sequences, but it isn't enough in a way to. I walked away from this film being like, oh my god, this is such an elevated, dark story that's got all the perverse things I usually like. That said, I did overall enjoy the film. It reminded me a lot of things, like once we get to 1965, the children, Arvin and Lenora, that made me feel, I kept thinking of Night of the Hunter, like with Robert Mitchum and Lillian Gish, the Charles Lawton film. Like if those children had grown up in an environment, they probably would have ended up kind of as messed up as this. What did you like about it?
I agree with you. I think for being such a dense story with all these sort of interconnecting components, it's told in a way that is manageable. So that's quite the feat. Mm-hmm. Because I had to really, I was surprised that I was able to put everything together just now. But I think that's a testament to the storytelling. Mm-hmm. It does flow well. It's a lot. I also, so what I liked about it, I also think Tom Holland did a good job.
He did do a good job. Mm-hmm.
I think that casting is interesting.
Often with the cast, sorry to cut you off, but the sprawling cast, usually I'll feel like, somebody was underutilized, but everybody kind of gets their are used effectively in their roles.
Yeah.
Like Wasikowska, it's kind of a small role for her, but I thought she was cast well.
Yeah.
As Helen.
That being said, one of my first notes was that this film feels complicated. Mm-hmm. It's one of those 30 minutes in, I just thought oh boy, I have to pay attention. I really have to, which is not a problem.
Sure, and I think and I'm sure it's in your notes about Pattinson, you kind of were distracted by.
Yeah, but I'll get to that. I think, let me just go down my notes quickly. So when we first see Carl and Sandy attempting to take photos of Roy having sex with Sandy, I thought is that how they had to do porn back in the 50s? You gotta kill fools to get dirty pictures. What else do I have here? So the Reverend, when we first meet him, there's a really good scene because the townsfolk are told this new preacher's coming into town, everyone bring a dish. Mm-hmm. But Arvin and Lenora's grandmother, they're poor. Mm-hmm. So there's a scene where we see her going to the butcher to pick up chicken livers, which are cheap, and she makes a plate of chicken livers and puts them on this chipped up plate. And Robert Pattinson's character reads her for these chicken livers, but not he's making fun of her. He's kind of making an example of her, how even if the poor people can have something to bring, then that's how you know there's faith. And he shames her. But I thought that was a really good scene.
Yeah, there are several really good scenes.
My next thought was like, how old is the Reverend supposed to be? Because Robert Pattinson looks a little off to me.
Sure.
As like in that role, but he does a fine job. His accent was fine, but I wasn't convinced that it wasn't dubbed. You told me it was his voice, but
I think that sounded like him.
But it sounds good, so if it is him, then he did a good job.
As far as how he looks, I don't know. I feel like Campos was going for a Burt Lancaster, Elmer Gantry type look. Not that Robert Pattinson looked at all like Burt Lancaster, but of that youthful charlatan kind of edge. I think the way you were talking about him is kind of the complaints you had about Marlon Brando and The Fugitive kind. I think as well, as far as distracting casting is.
Yeah, because in that film, Mr. Brando's not, he's not the sexiest, like, he doesn't quite fit. But yeah, in this film, they all do a fine job. Mm-hmm. So, it was, and I actually thought Robert Pattinson looked better than I normally think he looks, so.
I think Riley Keough and Jason Clarke were nice and creepy. I would have probably liked to delve more into their psychology than I think.
Well, that would be my biggest gripe, is we don't get a sense, like saying the serial killers, we don't get an idea of their motives at all, which is a shame because it's such a creepy thought. Because when you think about that, like that region of the United States during that time and how people could commit these heinous crimes and go, unchecked, is creepy in itself. But yeah, we don't get any...
Because the recoil over what they ostensibly get away with should be kind of like the opening, those opening moments of Mississippi Burning or something, which I think you also brought, where you just are like, ugh.
So I don't feel like this film feels lurid enough for what's happening. I mean, because we get a montage where we see that like Carl and Sandy have like cut off men's genitals and done all these really crazy things. But the way it's shown is like, like Pennywise kills Arvin's dog and like hangs it as a sacrifice, and it sounds worse than it actually plays out. There are several moments that are pretty violent. I mean, even like when the Harry Potter man sacrifices his wife and he like spends some time sharpening a screwdriver to then he very quickly like stabs her in the neck. And it was a shock, but it's more because we were told in the beginning that she was taken away and her body wasn't found for 7 years. So we knew she was going to die. We were just waiting for it. So when it happens, it's just like a shock in how he did it. But yeah, it doesn't feel as dark as I would want. After watching it, I feel like the tone I'm looking for is like a mix of Mississippi Burning with Natural Born Killers.
Sure. That said, even parsing through everything that's happened, it is a film I feel like I would watch again. There is a lot going on. There are a lot of subtext, and I think that's where our conversation had been heading to when we were speaking of it, is, if you want to get into that, how if you take a step back, it's really about the fractured men that fought in the war and the violence they saw, and then how they were not really cared for correctly coming back, and how this created this generational trauma. And how religion is mixed up weirdly in there, and I think that the Luger, which could almost have been a MacGuffin, is an important object that's passed down between generations, that's used to kill people and also define the trajectory of the father and the son.
I think, yes, I agree. There are a lot of interesting conversation topics. It kind of reminds me of the Bay of Silence. Like how they're like, this is a much better film. This is a better film, but the fact that it was like 3 to 4 different stories that I think could have each been flushed out individually. Because I think the lack of sort of background for many of these characters is what left me slightly unsatisfied. Sure. Also, getting back to the tone, I thought like the film doesn't feel sweaty or humid or gritty.
Like It's almost is, and also I think the only line I wrote down is Robert Pattinson being smarmy and saying, "Have you shown yourself as the Lord made you?" to Eliza Scanlen, or I also like the part where he's delusions. But it's almost like the script could have used it needed more also, to recycle this word again, lurid dialogue, like some Tennessee Williams punch in there.
Yes, but I was gonna say, normally watching films from this era I don't like because when it's a bunch of white people, you already know how they're gonna treat any black characters. So I generally don't, I avoid these storylines. But I actually thought that the fact that there are no black people in this story and no sort of hints at racist activity or actually made me feel comfortable.
Sure.
Well,
these characters are all so consumed with their own shit going on.
Yeah, and I don't know what, and I don't know why I'm saying this, except that I thought it made this film more palatable for me.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't even need to go there. We can't even get beyond.
Yeah, you couldn't even get beyond all the...
Because these people are so enmeshed in their own dilemmas. Even Sebastian Stan's aside, because he's trying to get reelected as sheriff. And what did you say? This is the title should have been.
Oh, I was laughing so hard to myself because I was having a hard the devil all the time. I don't title doesn't speak to me, but I thought the title should be They Killing Everybody. That could be the title. Or Spider-Man versus Batman.
By way of Winter Soldier.
Well, you added that because I don't know that. But yeah. Well, because Spider-Man kills Batman.
This is true.
My last note is Sebastian Stan looks like they stuffed him.
I think
he was wearing a fat suit and then he has cotton in his mouth.
I think they were trying to age him from the 57 to 65 segments. Because it's weird because I technically had a Sebastian Stan double feature yesterday because I watched Monday.
That film was called Monday?
The film was called Monday from the Greek film. And yeah, he looks like almost a different person. That
being said, I did enjoy this film enough. I would watch it again because I'm sure I missed a few things. It's a little long for my taste, but I don't know how it couldn't be because there's so much in it.
Right. I liked it. As I said, I would have rather have seen this as a miniseries event than say, I think justifying turning Big Little Lies into a miniseries.
Yeah, we could have thrown that away.
That could have been a nice 2-hour film. The texture, it's clearly written on based on something that's textured.
It needs room to breathe. Mm-hmm. What would you give it?
We didn't even talk about Antonio Campos and his whole Borderline film crew. All those Sean Dirk and Josh Mann, all of those people. Anytime that Nicholas Pesh, anytime they direct a film, it's worth watching.
I don't know any of. What films are we talking about?
Well, Campos has directed his first film was After School with Ezra Miller about that kid that tapes. I think he catches 2 girls overdosing on camera and doesn't do anything about it. Simon Killer with Brady Corbett and Matty Diop about a killer in Paris. Okay. And then Christine with Rebecca Hall as the Floridian reporter that shot herself on camera based on a true story. Okay. Obviously attracted to very dark, troubling, disturbing material, but this is much more ambitious than any of those kind of more intimate settings have been. Simon Killer was. I don't know. I'm impressed. I liked it. 3.5 out of 5.
I would give it 3 out of 5. Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right.
Bye.